Welcome to the Dragon's Den. I'm your venerable host Orochi, and today we are going to continue our journey into the Impossible Lands. Today we are going to head from the capital of Nizwan to a quaint little port called Prada Hanam. This is on the opposite side of the little island. Because we have Nissan over here, and Prada Hanam is right over here. Not too terribly far. So you can see that this is basically the cluster of most of the cities, and then we have a little bit going on up here, and people have definitely gone over all these other islands, but most of the southern section seems to be like wild jungle. It's like there's a lot of not much going on in the plains over here as well. So I can give you kind of like insight towards, you can make lots of adventures here because it's not very well kept. So this is where all the monsters and everything are, as well as the ocean. The ocean is very ups and downs, which Prada Hanam is started as a small fishing village, and its claim to fame has been that there suddenly, up from the desert sands, grew a structure, a dome that has 4 pillars around it. And everybody is like, oh, this is from the gods, or it has some secret thing that it's doing. But this happened hundreds of years ago. So you've got to think that some of the mystery of that has got to have worn off a bit. And I don't know, to me, as making it a thing is kind of weird that this little fishing village grew into a much larger destination because it has basically, a wonder of Jalmeria. It's like there's this thing that people go to and explore, and it is apparently basically it's a dungeon, like a mega dungeon kind of thing where people go in and everybody dies. Prada Haram is a giant tourist trap for adventurers and people seeking power and trying to discover what the dome contains. It's got treasures in it because people have found treasure in there. So, and that just leads people to going, oh, well, there's a little bit of treasure on the outer, easier sections to explore. There's got to be, ancient, super powerful artifacts and stuff somewhere in there, right? So let's go in, and people die. And now a lot of the treasure that resides within the dome is from other adventurers that have passed on. I think that's an amazingly interesting way to form a dungeon, and saying that, hey, a lot of the stuff you're going to find in this dungeon is just treasure from other adventurers. It's really grimdark. It's a really dark look at like building a dungeon. Because otherwise, it's a rather I say small because this is a small island. None of these places are really huge. It's very interesting how these pictures make it look like it's this grand, massive settlement, but every time you get to looking at the population of a place, it's like, I don't think a population of this number would need extravagant buildings this size, but that will forever be a issue I have with these. But damn, that is beautiful. Like, They do like making their places look gorgeous. So, other than the interesting aspect of they have this dungeon that popped up out of nowhere, and you could do a lot with that. Like that's all you're told. Even the GM, even as the GM, all you're told is like, yeah, there's this building and it's sort of a dungeon. There's stuff in there. That's it. It's all you're told. So you can use this in your games, and it doesn't even need to be in like this place. You could use this sort of an idea anywhere. That this structure just appears, and you can go into it, and there's stuff there. There's like anime. That's the core premise of the whole show. Is that hey, this dungeon appeared, and people go there. So that's really interesting, especially if you make sure your characters know, either by just outright telling them or by putting all these contextual clues everywhere, that this is where people die. Like, no adventurer has ventured, like, more than, and you can just say, like, maybe, like, 3 floors deep, or, to like the second part of a maze or something. You can have people who have mapped out some of the dungeon, and you have somebody selling these maps and go, oh yeah, this is as far as anyone has ever been and come back. And there could be multiple reasons for that. Like, yes, everybody dies that goes in, but maybe also, as a GM, you could just say, yeah, all the people who get to certain parts, there's teleporters that, like, literally just whisk people off to other planes of existence or other dimensions or whatever. So there's, lots of reasons why people disappear here, not just because everybody dies. And there's just a lot of, so much cool stuff as a GM that you could do with that. But otherwise, this is still pretty much a worker-centric fishing village. It is very... They still worship a lot of gods here, like Niswan, but it's much more low-key, where they don't have, religious days all the time. The city just has... It's like 2 or 3 holidays, and they do take much more culture from Nagadra. I think that's what it's called. But their home city that most of these people came to Jelmeri from, and a lot of people still come over from there. And so it's basically people wake up in the morning and you've got street vendors all over the place. The vast majority of the population goes to work for the whole day, and that's it. This is a working city. Like, barely even a city. It's a large township. And the majority of people here are just laborers and craftsmen. This is all hard work, and so a lot of their rituals and stuff are based around that. They've got a very strong identity as hardworking people. And so, let's see, right here, Prada Hanam, settlement level 7. So that's pretty low, which tells you that, it's not a huge place. It doesn't even have 7,000 people. It's also got this interesting aspect that a fairly large chunk of the non-human population is Nagaji. I always... Every place, I hate the way the population is broken down, because like, having humans be over like 80% of a population means that everybody else is a minority, like a massive minority. So much so that you think about older cities in America, like, in the 60s and 70s, you think of Chinatown. It's like that's the way I think of it. It's like there's so few of these people that they can just have like this one corner, this one block on a street, and that's where they all live. And I really hate anything that makes me think of that. There's just not enough variety. I mean, 4% other of 7,000 people. That's 1,000 would be 40. So that's 210 people. 210 people divided amongst the, dozens of different ancestries that are going to live here. That is horrible. Like, yes, this is a smaller settlement, but, I hate the breakdowns all the time. Because others should easily be like 10% on most places. But I just hate the attempt to make human-centricness be all-consuming. Like, oh yeah, humans dominate everywhere just because that's who's playing the game and that makes them feel comfortable. And I hate that. I hate that sort of stuff in everything, not just TTRPGs. I hate it in movies and books. I hate all of that. But the fact that an actual large percent of Nagaji has a very large impact on the history of this place and the politics and goings-on of the upper class, which we will get into in a little bit. We've got some of the bigger religions here. Threats, Asurans, criminals, ocean predators, Rakshasas, storms, and the Myrmidon. Because you go into the Myrmidon and you don't come back. But as always, we got Asuras, evil spirits, and evil outsiders. Rakshasas, who are much less overt here. They almost always are using their shape-shifting abilities here to blend in, unlike Niswan, where they are legally allowed to just wander around. They can still do that here, but it's much more of a taboo thing, I think, because people don't trust Rakshasas that much here. Not that they do anywhere else, but, And then the ocean is a huge part of this city, so ocean predators are going to be a big thing. And you've always got criminals everywhere. It is a big thing to note that there is one criminal syndicate in the city, run by an Undine. And she has successfully fought off all foreign incursion into the city from, other criminals who would set up shop. So basically she's set up her own little mob unit and controls everything, and almost to the point that most of the criminal activity in the city is organized, which I think is interesting. There's, as always, you can do a lot of cool stuff with that. And we have all this on the Myrmidon, and it allows you to have up to 13th level items from other adventurers, which tells you that even some 13th level people die in the Myrmidon. And that other people have found their gear, so you can use your imagination on that and find ways to figure out why that would be true. But that's really cool. And then you get 13th level stuff for casters, because the Rakshasas believe that the Myrmidon is part of their manifest destiny, and something is going to happen soon. For whatever reason, some of them have had epiphanies or whatever that something is going to happen with the dome soon. So between them and adventurers, you can actually get much higher spellcasting services. But double usual price, and it takes you a little bit to find it. And then here we have the most important people in the city. We have Bedran, which is the leader, and he's Nagaji, which is a very interesting thing because there's a non-insignificant amount of people who do not trust the Nagaji. So to have their basically appointed leader be Nagaji is a big thing. And his advisor is Vishvanda, who is a Naga. And the big problem for Nagaji in the city is that most Nagaji come from the now mostly failed Naga Empire, and most people think that they still have ties to the Naga Empire, and the Naga Empire is completely evil. Of course, Nagas are always evil, and they're that same sort of evil, like Drow and stuff, where they're like, hey, we're the only ones that should exist, and we want to enslave or wipe everybody else out. That's our primary thing. That's what we do. That's all everybody knows us for. And so everyone's like, yeah, they still have ties to the Empire, and so they want to kill all of us. Why do we even allow them here? So you have a lot of that sort of friction in their politics, and perhaps, in everyday kind of life a little bit, because there are a fair amount of Nagaji here. Which I think is a little bit unfortunate that if you have a strict GM, or strictly looking at, if you want to play a Nagaji character, where do they come from? Well, it has to be a place where like the little thing here says that this is where they are, and then you have to pull from there. It's like, well, why are they there? What kind of cultures do they have? And so playing a Nagaji character, you basically only have two options for part of your background. You either still serve Naga in some capacity, or you're more of a rebel and you're like, that the Empire failed, it's crumbling, and the Naga now are just barely struggling to get by in a human-dominated, absolutely dominated world. So why would we still go around with their rather offensive mindset of superiority? Which, like, the vast majority of player characters are going to be that way. They're going to be the rebel characters. But not including that in part of your your character creation in some way, trying to play as a Nagaji that doesn't have that in there. Like, if your GM asks you about it and you're like, I don't know, I didn't even think about it. It's like, well, that's not doing a good job of realizing what the Nagaji are all about. And in a lot of ways, it's cool that they have that, a very interesting cultural story that you can draw from. On the other hand, also having it be laid out so that not including that in any way doesn't make a lot of sense, because almost all Nagaji have it, is kind of pigeonholes you a little bit more than I would like. Because a lot of people would probably just see the write-up for them, or see Nagaji, just see pictures of them, or find them on Path Builder, and just like, oh, hey, these are good stats and cool abilities, I like the way they look, I want to play this. But again, that's kind of why these books are here, is to give you more info on the world, which is so fantastic. Alright, let us travel down. There is one more map I want to show. They have a little section here on vocabulary, local vocabulary. We've got a lot of water spirits and stuff that live off the coast, which is super cool. I want to share this these pictures because these are really nice. You've got water spirits, and you've got half genies, and you've got these cool motifs where people wear their iconography of their gods and worships on their stuff. It's This art is very good for the style that it's presenting. It's very tasty. And then flip down to the map of the city. We also have a picture of the leader right here. This is Badrin. And it's interesting because Badrin is a monk, and he heavily believes he's also a devout worshiper of Orochi. So he believes in being perfect at his job. That's what he strives for every day, is to be the best at his job that he can be, and then better from there. Which is very interesting considering the problems he has to face of, people not trusting him because he's Nagaji and all this other stuff. But you would think in Jalmari, the first thing you would consider about somebody is their religion. You've got so many devout people in this area that when somebody tells you that they follow this god, then you'd be able to be like, oh, well, they can't be a bad person because they follow that god, and that god's all about this, so they must, in some way, exemplify that. Especially being a monk, that would be even more so in that way. But people are trash, so they always think bad things about people that they don't get along with or have any reason to fear because they're different or whatever. Just how things are. Here we have a nice picture of the city. We've got the big-ass Murmur Dome over here. And we've got a nice big riverway through the heart of the city out into the ocean. And over here is Zemidar's Rise, where this is where Badrin lives in his big offices here. There's a bunch of little other things here and there within the town, which you can get the book and find them all out. I love that, all of these cool towns are fleshed out so much in these books so that you can just run adventures there. And even if people only stop there for a little while, you can make it feel like an actual living city instead of just making stuff off the fly. Some DMs are really good at making stuff off the fly, and some not so much, so it's good to have this as an option if you need it. I absolutely love it. Otherwise, the only other notable thing here is the sort of different factions at play, because there's much more Nagaji influence here, and you actually have a Naga representative that is right next to your leader, and there's a non-insignificant number of people who are... I don't know if they have any other values in common other than their distrust of Nagaji. But you have a sort of, political boiling thing, which might strike a little bit too close to home for some people, but it might be something some people want to explore, where you have racism and maybe you have you want to progress that story a little bit and, set the spark off, so some riots start or some, vigilantism goes on, or some You've got a bunch of crime that starts happening that's all targeted at certain people one way or another, and try to tastefully deal with that sort of thing. It's an option to play those sort of stories out here, and I think it's always good to have places where certain stories are readily available, because a lot of TTRPG stuff can be cathartic if done right with the right people. So that's always a fantastic thing. Otherwise, it looks super dense, which is weird that this started off as just a harbor town, which this is sort of like, you can imagine that this is where it started, and then just grew up from there. Another of the interesting aspects of this city is that they heavily believe that when you build a building on top of an older building, it has much better karma, because you're absorbing all the goodwill and all of the good vibes and karma and everything from the previous people who lived there into the new building. And that when the expansion places, where buildings are first being built on new soil and stuff, are automatically doomed to have bad stuff happen to them, which is rather strange because, like, realistically, you'd think it'd be the opposite way. Building newer stuff on top of older stuff tends to have bad results. But that's part of the city's culture. But you would have to think that when expanding, like, the people who do the city design had to have had something in mind, because cities aren't like this in general. Like, I guess some, like, European cities are more like this, but cities in America are generally haphazard disasters. Like, only on the West Coast do we have any sort of actual, city design that was ever implemented, because people were never thinking forward enough about how it's going to look in 50 to 100 years. They're like, we're building stuff now and just trying to get this shit to work properly as is. So when I see super densely built stuff like this, like, little sections like this make more sense where they should be all over the place. Like this makes more sense to me. But yeah, just having so many buildings clustered in together, that's not really something I've ever seen before. Even when I go to bigger cities, they're not anything like this. So, as a new place, maybe that's because of the people who originally settled here. They were just used to tightly packed city planning. So that may or may not resonate with some people. It definitely doesn't with me. But that is it for Prada Hanam. And now we will delve into the unique aspects of stuff in Jalmeri. We got new familiars. Requires at least 4 abilities. And it's sort of these tiny little elephants. And I, as much as it says that they're blue, I'm sure your GM would allow it to be pink, because that's just also hilarious. It has 4 abilities, and it has the Created Magic ability, which is your Serial Familiar grants you the Mage Hand and Guidance cantrips via the cantrip connection granted ability. If one or more of these cantrips isn't on your spell list, you can replace the cantrip and or cantrips not on your spell list with a cantrip or cantrips from your spell list instead. Just gives you some extra two extra spells you might not have. It has dark vision and touch telepathy, which are pretty cool. And it has a unique ability, Turn of Fate. 2 actions once a day, 30-foot range. Your Zero shifts the scales of fortune for one target's next attempt at an attack roll, saving throw, or skill check. If targeted with bad fortune, the target attempts a will save against your class or spell DC, whichever is higher, with effects depending on the result of the save. This is a misfortune effect. If the target is good fortune, the target rolls twice and uses the better result. This is a fortune effect. Regardless of outcome, targets are immune to Turn of Fate for 1 day. I guess that last part is only there in case you have multiple of these in your party, since it's a once per day frequency. Targeting an enemy with this, success or crit is nothing. Failure, the target rolls twice and uses the worst result. Crit failure as failure, except the target is affected for the next 3 attempts. So that's a really cool failure effect, but there's no success effect, and as we know from running the numbers and playing the game, success is the most often outcome of most rolls for monsters. So, as a once-a-day ability, this is not great. If you've played 5e at all, this just gives advantage or disadvantage. And thus, since that's all it does, I would probably say you don't even need to make this once a day. This could be an encounter power, and it would still be fine. But I generally like cool abilities to be used more often. New weapons. And a new weapon trait, Injection. This weapon can be filled with an injury poison. Immediately after a successful attack with this weapon, you can inject the target with the loaded poison with a single interact action. Refilling the weapon with a new substance requires 3 interact action and uses both hands. That sounds terrible, because in general, poisons aren't that powerful, and you're spending money on them. So this is like a once-a-combat ability, because you're going to fill your weapon with poison before combat, and then just get 1 use of it. So not really interesting. And then we got Broad Spear, Chakri, Danpata, Dlanchake, Gada, and Kalis. Which, yeah. Chris, Panabas, Tulwar. I think most people know what a Tulwar is. Thorn Whip, Vasap, and Volkivar. Zulfkar. Maybe Fikar. It looks retarded. Like, that's definitely not a powerful weapon. 1d6 as a sword, deadly disarm sweep. I mean, it exists. Disarm is the worst trait you can have, pretty much. Sweep on a low damage weapon isn't great. Versatile. P on a slashing weapon is useless almost. There's like less than 1% of monsters where that would be ever useful. So yeah, that's kind of a garbage weapon. Most weapons are pretty terrible though. Like, most weapons are built for ultra niche builds that can somehow take advantage of them and that's the problem. When you make a super niche build for niche weapons, that means you can use that weapon to baseline proficiency. Whereas if you pick up a great axe or a longsword or any of the primary base weapons, that's the level of efficiency you're aiming for, because the power ceiling is the starter. That's the game is built in such a way as you are, no matter how specialized you get, you can't really get above that soft power ceiling most of the time. And so taking weapons that are weak in the hands of somebody who isn't specializing in a certain build sucks. And then knowing that when you specialize heavily into it, you're still just reaching those standard levels of effectiveness. You just have like more options. Like, the options just aren't great because disarm is generally terrible. Nobody really uses it. Even if you specialize in disarm, it doesn't do what you think it does, because you have to get like 2 critical successes on disarm to actually knock somebody's weapon out of their hand. And it has to be continuous, which attacking somebody twice to disarm them twice, taking a -5 penalty to your second attack because of your multiple attack penalty, and trying to get a second critical success so that you can actually disarm them is virtually impossible most of the time. So to be able to disarm in a group, you have to have 2 people that specialize in disarm just to be able to get it done, and they have to both target the same thing in the same round, and it's not really worth much. And sweep, like, what's the point of using sweep with low damage? You want to hit 2 targets, you want to have a bigger damage die. So, yeah, a lot of weapons just, even when built properly, they aren't very powerful. I much prefer when you specialize in something, you should be better than just the baseline, because you're always going to be sacrificing damage with most of these weapons, right? So the other things you're doing need to be really good. Anyway, we got the Vazap. It's a knife, which is pretty terrible weapon group. D4, which is the worst damage you can do. Agile, finesse, injection, uncommon, versatile, and only for Vishkanya. So it is a ancestry weapon. Versatile P is trash. This is an assassin's weapon. Well, in the way that most people think of assassins, where you just do that one hit somebody with like a paralyzing poison or something, and then go to town cutting the crap out of them. So if you can find the right kind of poison, then this could be a thematic weapon. I won't say it's good or useful, but it's very thematic. And if you could like backstab somebody and have them fail or critically fail some sort of paralyzing poison, that would be super good and actually powerful. But you'd have to be playing Vishkanya, and you'd have to be a rogue or an alchemist that specializes in poisons, which you can do. So it's cool that there is a weapon now that really lets you do that. Callus, D8, really fantastic for a one-hander. Deadly D8 on top of that. This is probably one of the most powerful swords we have, because the longsword is just 1d8 versatile P. This has deadly D8 on top of that, which is usually worth a degradation in damage die. So yeah, Callus is like the strongest one-hander. It's uncommon, so you have to figure out a reason why your character would have one, but that's probably one of the best one-handers for pure damage. That's pretty cool. I like it, because deadly is only really useful for fighters, and it really only starts to shine like level 14 and above. So, yeah. Most of the time, this being slightly stronger than a longsword won't ever matter. The Gata, it's a club. Backswing, two-handy 12, and only Vanara can use it. Well, it's Vanara-centric. D8, D12 two-handed with backswing. That's pretty fucking good. Like, I don't know what a great mall or a great club has for traits offhand. They probably have one trait, and it might be backswing. So this is a great club that you can actually wield one-handed for lesser damage. It's an improvement on an existing weapon. I like that. I like that a lot. A lot of people would see that as, oh, that's power creep, blah, blah, blah. It's like, but it's an ancestral weapon. It's not uncommon, though. So if you can find a way to get one from a Vanara or just play as a Vanara, you can have a cool super club. I like that. Backswing's actually pretty decent as a trait. So yeah, I do think it's maybe a little bit too powerful. Like, if it didn't have backswing, I would say it would be a fantastic weapon. With backswing, it's maybe a little bit too good for, like, Vanara barbarians. But clubs aren't fantastic, and I don't think any weapon is ever going to beat the Great Axe in terms of just monstrously disgusting beatdown power, just because of its crit spec. So, yeah. Donchak. 1d8, pole arm. Just this little thing right here. Very weird. Hampering, which is interesting. It's not great, though. It allows you to spend an action to slow somebody down. Or designate a square to make difficult terrain, I believe it was. The only other item I know that has hampering is the Catfolk Whip. Reach, of course, because it's a polearm. Reload 1, tethered, thrown 20 foot. So it's basically like you can shoot out this ring out to 20 feet and then just reel it back in. And it still does the 1d8. So this is pretty shit-tastic damage for a two-hander, but it also has a ranged component. If you can find a way to get good use out of that, then that's pretty cool. I'm very unsure if the loss of damage is worth it, but because you already got reach, so this would technically be a 25-foot. I wonder. As a GM myself, I would say you can hold this thing out at reach, so it's got 5-foot minimum reach, and then you can shoot it 20 feet beyond, so you can shoot it 25 feet from your square. Other people might rule it 20 feet from your square, but since it has reach, I wouldn't. I would add those together, but that's just me. But yeah, this is a cool weapon, but with most cool and interesting weapons in this game, your whole party needs to have tactics that utilize this, or otherwise you're just not being as useful as you otherwise could be. And a lot of weapons have that. And a lot of character builds are like that, where your party needs to be able to utilize the things you bring to the table, or otherwise you're not only not going to be living up to your potential, you're also going to be subpar to, like, a cookie cutter build, which I find problematic a lot of the times. Because if you're doing play with random people, then don't ever make an interesting character that has an interesting build, because you're never going to be in a party that could actually make use of it. Broad Spear. Oh, and these are also advanced weapons, so that means they're all absolute shit for everybody except fighters. So with that in mind, I would say all of these are fucking garbage. I hate advanced weapons. Like I would say, knowing that these are advanced now, I should have started at the top instead of the bottom. That was so the Gata is a good weapon. I would say it's not overpowered at all in any way because it's an advanced weapon. A fighter using this weapon could be using a great axe instead and probably do a little bit better. But I think advanced weapons all across the entire game need to be a lot more powerful because everybody that uses them that does not have some, like a lot of the ancestral weapons, you can take a feat to make them equivalent of martial weapons, and fighters can do that. Everybody else is taking a -2 attack penalty using these things because they're advanced at first level, and then you don't progress with them when you level up, so they're all useless to the vast majority of people, and so I hate them. So broad spear, just a sweeping spear. That's cool, and D10. This is a cool weapon, but it's advanced, so sucks ass. I hate advanced weapons in the game. There's not enough access to making them equal to martial weapons, and the vast majority of them are just weaker than martial weapons. Very few of them are even on par with basic martial weapons. So yeah. Dentpada, D6, sword, agile twin, uncommon. That's cool. Twin weapon that's agile. D6s. I'm trying to remember all the other twin weapons in the game. Like, D6 isn't all that great. Like, the hook swords are pretty much the same thing. So, those aren't super special. The hook swords might just be finesse and not agile, though. I don't remember. Chris, knife, agile, deadly D8, finesse. That's... Deadly D8 on a knife is pretty stupid. Like, you don't bring a D4 weapon and expect to do a lot of damage. It needs to do other stuff because your general damage is low. Very, very, very low. And this doesn't really bring anything other than tiny spikes of damage. So I'd say that's not a great weapon. Even if you're in a group that can let you if you're a rogue and your group's letting you backstab all the time, and they're debuffing enemies to increase your crit rate, that's still not fantastic. I mean, you can easily get a D6 agile finesse weapon. Panabas, forceful sweep, two-hand D10. D6 damage one-handed. That's a cool weapon. Forceful is garbage. It's not the worst trait in the game, but I absolutely hate it just because trying to get it to work is so difficult. You need to make 3 attacks in a round to really get much use out of it, and that sucks. Like, doing 3 attacks is only for very specialized builds. Like, yeah, the two-hand D10 is pretty cool, and sweep is pretty cool if you're doing this two-handed and make a sweep build with it. That's a cool weapon. And the Tulwar is the same weapon, except for it doesn't have sweep. It has versatile P. So the Tulwar is just a worse weapon. Sweep is a better trait than versatile P. Big time. Sweep is a damaging trait. It actually allows you to do damage. If you're a fighter or barbarian and you take sweeping attacks so that you can hit multiple opponents, or when If you get high enough level and you can take whirlwind attack, sweep triggers off from that and works. Whereas versatile P is only useful for literally less than 1% of enemies that are printed. So it sucks that the Tulwar is trash, because the Tulwar is sort of a iconic weapon. It's been in D&D for decades. Like, the Tulwar and the Scimitar are probably like the biggest, Middle Eastern-esque sort of weapons that most people would know about. So making it terrible is kind of like, why does the Panabas exist? Why does the Tulwar just not have these stats? It would make more sense to me, but whatever. Thorn Whip, D4. Most whips are D4 because they're bad. Brawling. That's weird. Huh. Brawling's not a bad group, though, because the crit spec of Brawling is stun, whereas Sword is flat-footed and Knife is bleed damage, I think? So stunning somebody with a crit, it's pretty cool. Disarm, Finesse, Goron, Reach, Trip, uncommon. Disarm is trash. Finesse is... Most whips have Finesse. Most whips have Reach. And Trip is cool. But most regular whips are also flails, and flail is like the best weapon group. So I don't know about this. It's cool, but I wouldn't say it's great. Now we have upgrades. This is the reprinting of the Student of Perfection archetype. So this supersedes the previous printed one. And I actually have not gone over in depth on this one, so that's what we will be doing here. Perfect weaponry. You gain monastic weaponry monk class feat. You can use melee monk weapons with any Student of Perfection feats or Student of Perfection focus spells that normally require unarmed attacks. Perfect resistance. You gain resistance based on your school, and you can buff it. Perfect Kai expert. You get the school spell. And then you get the advanced school spell. And then you get the Grand Master spell. I think they only had 2 spells before. These might be some new spells. Yep. Unblinking Flame Aura, Unblinking Flame Emblem. These are all new spells. Not all of them. Some of them are probably the previously printed ones. But that's already cool. And then we got the Heaven Seeker, which has been problematic because of Heaven's Thunder was massively overpowered in its first printing. So now it's until the end of your next turn, your unarmed attacks and any monk weapons you wield deal additional electricity and sonic damage. The amount of each damage type is equal to the number of damage die for the weapon or unarmed attack. I like that they've sort of consolidated so that most like auto-scaling damage boosts that you can get are written this way. It's just like, oh, it's just 1 extra point of damage per die or 2 extra damage per die. I really like that, because that means, when you get an ability that gives you this extra damage, you know what it's going to be, and you know how it scales. And it's good. Like, 2 extra damage per die is pretty damn good. Any creature who successfully grapples you or is successfully grappled by you takes this damage immediately after the grapple check is resolved. That's pretty cool. That was in the old one. If you also know the Key Blast spell, you can choose to deal either electricity or sonic damage with that spell instead of force. So Heaven's Thunder got toned way, 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 way down, and it's just in line with most damage boosts, which I think is alright. It was redonkulous before. And then I think all the rest of this is pretty much the same. wonder, does this have a list of... Sky Seeker, you leap towards an opponent, make a single strike, steal the sky, makes it so you can... Gives you a spell which stops flying stuff. Huh. This doesn't include the ability, because I used Heaven Seeker in Fist of the Ruby Phoenix, and there was a cool ability that allowed you to... Actually, was it this one, or was it... No, it wasn't Heavy Seeker, it was... this one. Those are all the spells. Yeah, these are all expansive, not exclusive, whereas this is exclusive because it's a reprinting. Yeah. But it's cool stuff. And Steel Sky, unarmed strike against a flying creature, and the creature falls. Which is really good if you don't have flying stuff, but it's pretty easy to just get like Boots of Flying or a Potion of Flying or have somebody use a Scroll of Flying on you. I don't know. Some higher level... Well, I guess it's only level 10, so it's not bad. That's pretty good, actually. Then we will move into the Mana Waste on our next one. That is all for now. Have a great evening and adventure.